Hey everyone, Dan Kaufman, Sport Techies Managing Director again. We are entering the last two pieces of content for the first day of Sports Capital Symposium, and you're in for a treat. This is going to be a great one. He was the keynote speaker at the 2018 Sport Techies State of the Industry Conference. He is one of the most engaging and powerful speakers that I've seen. DeMaurice Smith, Executive Director of the NFLPA, in conversation with author and sports journalist Howard Bryant. Take the stage, gentlemen.
D, how are you?
I am wonderful, brother. It's great to see you. Always great to be with you. And to Sports Techie, thanks for having me.
Can you go back into your Wayback Machine? Believe it or not, it is still 2020. It feels like it was 10 years ago. Yeah. But let's go back to March. And you're in Florida. I was in Florida down at spring training.
Right.
And we're starting to hear word that I know at ESPN, they pretty much sent us home. And then the NBA decides they're not playing Indian Wells tennis. They're not playing. And now we're into the pandemic. The NFL's got the longest sort of wait time before your season started, but you still had summer, training camp and everything happening. Where were you at that time? And sort of what was your view of what was going to happen?
Well, Howard, you're always a fan of history and a student of history. And we have that in common. Back then it was March 7th or 8th. We're in a rep meeting. We hadn't yet ratified the collective bargaining agreement. Obviously, a lot of contention around that. And we're in Broward County, Florida. It's Thursday. We hear that they're going to declare the county in a state of emergency on Friday. Thankfully, our convention ends on Saturday. And I formed our first COVID team meeting with our experts on that Monday. And I will say, the first thing I did was on the way back from Florida, I ordered John Barry's book about the great influenza virus in the early 1900s and knocked that out in 3 days. And I think I've told you before, I put that book away utterly terrified. Well, just terrified. And from there, we had to do a deal to manage we had to finish the CBA. And then weeks after that, we had to do a deal with the league in order to restructure off-season workouts. And then 4 weeks after that, we had to do another deal to try to figure out how we were going to manage a $4 billion offset into this year because of COVID. So, I think the great thing about leaders is they tend to be put in situations where they call upon the strength of everybody else. Mm-hmm. The bad thing about leaders is at the end of the day, someone looks at you and says, okay, what's the decision? And given a novel and emerging virus where we saw the NBA shut down, MLB shut down, certainly no March Madness. For basketball, the question became, how do we get to a season? And even more complicated, if we're able to get there, how do we finish? Yeah. And let's just say that experiment is ongoing.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had a little bit of an advantage because your season started so late between March? You've got a longer lead time than everybody else. What is your feeling when you start to see these conversations about bubble versus non-bubble, playing versus non-playing, opt-out? You've got the back seat here. You can sit and take a look at the whole field. What was your feeling about the decisions that were being made in other sports?
Well, the great thing about this job, and probably one of the few great things about this job, is the relationship between the union heads of all the other sports. We are all so very close. Don Fear, Michelle Roberts, Tony Clark, they are like brothers and sisters to me. So, I had the advantage of watching them go through this. But, I would say two things. One, that relationship allowed us to really start thinking about not only the physical issues of how we were going to do it. It really served as a great framework for dealing with the ethical issues. And to me, one of the overriding ethical concerns about this was, yes, we have a great business, but football is not essential in America. And so how do you build a system around something that is not essential while we're watching New York struggle with providing essential services, Miami, Dallas, New Jersey. To me, that was sort of the first big question, hurdle to get over.
And when you've got people telling you that the sport is essential.
1,000%. I don't remember, who I got into it with on a radio show, but someone said, well, we need football to come back. We need football for our country. And, I think I told him on the phone, it sounds like we need ventilators. And I know that ventilators are essential, but there's no way, shape, or form that I'm ever going to say that what our guys do, and it's tremendous, but I'm never going to equate what our guys do with what our first responders do, what our doctors do, what our nurses do. And then the second thing was, yes, we had a little bit of a lag time, but unlike baseball or unlike basketball, football in many ways is sort of created to spread the virus.
Yeah.
The positioning of our O linemen, D linemen, the close contact, the fact that it's the job of the other guy to wrestle the other person to the ground, trying to come up with a set of protocols that were going to be as safe as possible was, I don't mind telling you this, the hardest, most difficult thing that I've done in what it is, almost 30 years of a legal career. I don't want to do it again.
Hopefully you won't. Was there a desire? Was there a desire? Could you sort of walk the layman through the layperson through? You've got 1,500 members. Right. What is the line of communication? What was the conversation between to play or not to play?
Right.
How does that communication translate on your side? Never mind negotiating with the league. How do you talk to your own players about what do you guys want to do?
Well, we're blessed with great leadership. So to pull back, every team has 3 union reps. So that's roughly 100 guys. Those 100 union reps elect an 11-person executive committee. We were blessed. One of the players who got elected, to be our president, J.C. Treader, center for the Cleveland Browns, came out of the ILR school of Cornell. I kid around with him a lot. He's our first COVID president. But we had a group of men who I think got to a point where they appreciated the gravity of it all. And for me, talking to them, and my job is more of a teacher. This is not the flu. This is not a cold. We're worried that people who get this virus may not only, suffer severe injuries. Some of them could lose their life, and worse yet, one of the things that I couldn't live with was we can't do anything in football that poses a disproportionate risk of harm to everybody else. Mm-hmm. So how do we engage in this business and not take test kits away from the public? How do we engage in this business and not stretch our first responders who are already thin? For players who had pre-existing conditions, how do we make sure that they're not in a trick bag of either playing and risking unreasonably risking their health and doing that in a way that it's fair for everybody? And again, it wasn't easy. I like to say that, with 2,000 NFL players, you're only going to have about 4,000 opinions. So, a lot of those conversations were tough. But the country's in a very difficult place now. And I think the one thing that we have going for us, and I will say this, a good thing about the league, we all decided to follow the science and follow the best practices. And so when people would talk about, hydroxychloroquine or taking more zinc, or I can tell you this, daily testing, mass testing, contact tracing, wearing mask, and social distancing are the things that brought football back.
Yep.
And weirdly, those are the exact same things that would deliver this country if everybody got on the same page without mentioning anybody's name.
Yeah. Was there a bubble conversation?
There was. The bubble didn't work for us because, first of all, in off season, remember, we've got roughly 2,000 guys who end up on the final roster.
Yep.
We have another 2,300 during the off season. So, we're dealing with a population of a little over, 4,000 people. Mm-hmm. And the more we discussed it with our internal experts, and we had a number of people from DARPA, Harvard, Mass General, there were two things that came from our discussions of potentially using a bubble. One, if you're going to go into the bubble, you have to go for the whole season. And that's a very long time. And given the way that the virus spreads, we were more concerned that grouping large numbers of people, given the unique role of football and the way you play it, actually posed more risk for that group inside the bubble. Yeah. And then second, I really felt that our players had to get their heads around changing and conforming their behavior to the manner in which the virus is spread. And if you create a bubble and you decide sometime, that at some point this bubble is going to end, I think what you're seeing, unfortunately, on some of our college campuses, you see sort of a snapback from social distancing and restricting behavior. And to me, look, the reality is, yes, we're heading into week 2. We're heading into week 2. Only 15 more to go. And I was really concerned about a potential snapback. So I love the fact that our guys decided from the outset they were going to live at home. We were going to structure training camp and in-season camp where you were basically going to drive to the facility, change, do your work, have virtual meetings if possible. No large meetings if possible. I like that because it conformed with the best practices that people were telling us to do.
Yeah. Did you feel so much of this conversation? You saw it in the NBA, you saw it in baseball when a lot of players started opting out. The concern about health and safety, and especially in your sport, health and safety that's embedded into your sport anyway. Yeah. In terms of the violent nature of the game in the first place. Was there any feeling, what was the level of, we really just can't do this year? Or did you feel like you had a window, let's see what happens to the other sports and to the country? By the time it's our turn to get going, we'll have a better feel for it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I didn't get a whole heck of a lot of confidence from the other sports because our sport is so much different than theirs. There were really long discussions about the ethical and moral implications of playing. And the only question I put to our experts was, is there a plausible way of conducting this business? And I use the word business, not sport, for all sorts of reasons. Is there a way to ethically and morally conduct this business in a way that doesn't unduly expose our membership or our communities to harm?
Yeah,
that's it. And frankly, if we would have been at the same levels of positivity rates or outbreak or deaths or hospitalizations that we were seeing in New York, Miami, Dallas, if those were the rates that we were dealing with now, I would question whether it would be ethically and morally the right thing to do. Yeah. For example, there were a lot of tough discussions with the league about starting off season in places that had run out of ICU beds. I mean, the likelihood of one of our players needing an ICU bed or needing a hospital bed is much higher in our sport than in other sports.
Yep.
So how do I go to a player or his family and say that he's got to engage in this work? If he gets hurt, there's not a hospital bed for him.
And that doesn't even include COVID. That's just getting hurt.
Oh, that's just a 100% injury rate, right?
Yep.
I mean, so and worse yet, when our players get hurt, and sometimes it's a severe injury, the manner of that injury requires that they're taken to, either the ICU portion of the hospital or at least the critical care section of the hospital.
Yep.
And relying on some doctor or some team doctor or some team official to say, oh, we're always going to find a place for an NFL player. Well, that doesn't make me feel any better, because that means you're going to displace someone else. So the real goal was, can we come up with a set of protocols, but also ensuring that there was enough of a compliance measure where this union obtained the ability to shut down football.
Yep.
If we believed that it wasn't safe enough. And look, Howard, the only thing that I used as a frame in this is we saw a number of people working in essential businesses like meat packing, grocery stores, nurses, doctors, who all throughout the summer were complaining that they didn't have the appropriate gear, or they were being put in situations where they were not safe.
Yep.
And those were failures by those businesses.
That's right.
To protect their workers.
So if we fast forward to June, I'm talking with the baseball players. They're thinking about reopening. They've got their plan to reopen. And the baseball players had a chat group that was designed for a sort of COVID, where they could all share information. And then George Floyd gets killed.
Yep.
And the COVID chat group actually suddenly turned in to a chat group about mobilizing and what to do about this. At the same time, Roger Goodell makes a video, as we all see, about saying we were wrong and we should have listened to the players. Yep. And obviously the first person I thought of with this was you, because 4 years ago, you and I are in DC talking about Colin Kaepernick, and we're talking about when he first took a knee, one of the first conversations you had with the league was guaranteeing the protections for that there was not going to be punishment for the players. Right. Then you go to that next January of 2017, and we see that there was plenty of punishment for at least one player.
Sure.
So how do you reconcile where you've been and on the Kaepernick issue, and then suddenly you see the commissioner talking about how we should have listened, when 4 years ago this was exactly the conversation? And I just keep saying, this is all the NFL's fault. I still think about this as a question. I say to myself when I'm working on these things, this is the NFL's fault in terms of the history. What would have happened if in those conversations in 2016, they had let Kaepernick protest as you guys had negotiated, and they didn't put the blockade around him the next January? What does this entire conversation look like, especially now that we've seen the NBA and the other sports ratchet up even more?
Yeah, going back to your and I's conversations about history and framing things, there's that line about thank God for unanswered prayer, right? I don't know. I think that, what would have happened if Governor Wallace doesn't stand in that doorway, right? What happens during the Montgomery bus boycott if the officials in Montgomery say people can ride wherever they want to ride? Sometimes I think that history has to play out in a way where people are aware of the sacrifice that others are willing to make to be on the right side of history.
Yep.
And we were talking a little bit before, we went on camera. Am I happy about where the league is now? Yes. Were they the exact same conversations we had with the league 4 years ago? Yes. There's a part of that that's that's both satisfying and yet weirdly unfulfilling, if that makes sense. I don't know. I mean, I think that, as we look, over the arc of history and that famous quote about, people believing that it does bend in a moral arc towards justice. It doesn't bend by itself.
No, 100%.
People need to bend it. And
right.
Holland took a brave stance. Players after him took a brave stance. And to your point, it's probably the first time that I can remember that all sports seem to be unified in this important effort.
Yeah. What was your feeling when you saw the Milwaukee Bucks and then Naomi Osaka and then the NHL and then Major League Baseball, and all of a sudden you're seeing a coordinated, unified effort from the players? The argument that I was making is that the players are making a deal. They're changing the deal with the public. That what essentially they're saying is that we're not necessarily willing to cooperate or to contribute to your distraction.
100%. And it's a change in the value proposition, right? To me, my greatest joy, and I know this might be unpopular, it will be, except maybe you and me, was that we didn't have a whole heck of a lot of sports entertainment during the marches and the unrest that proceeded after George Floyd. Neil Postman wrote that book, Entertaining Ourselves to Death, where everybody's looking for a distraction, and everybody codes it in different words, right?
Yeah.
This is the sport that brings America together, or this is a time when Democrats and Republicans can all cheer for something. I get it. But there's also an ugly aspect to entertainment where it allows you to turn a blind eye and a comfortable eye away from what's happening in your community. And I think you are exactly right. I think all of the players who made this decision decided that they were going to disrupt this value proposition that fans are somehow entitled to our players just being a distraction.
Yes.
Or a two-dimensional person. And that's been something that we've railed against here at the union for a long time. And believe me, I get a lot of conversations, I've been in a lot of conversations with friends of mine who say, I just don't understand why we have to have politics in sports. Well, as long as these sports, at least the ones we're talking about, are being played by humans, I think that we should be in a world where we have to engage human issues.
Yep. No, 100%. And especially too, when you're looking at the games themselves have been politicized. I'm just finishing up an essay now on this idea. Next year is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and no sport has been more politicized than the NFL in terms of the values in this country are shifting. So you're looking at 20 years worth of this, and 2, the players themselves are essentially telling the public, at least when I see the players walk out, my attitude is the players are telling the public, if you're not going to come back because I am horrified by seeing George Floyd be killed, then don't come back. And that's a really powerful thing, because they're not doing what they did a year or 2 years ago, which is to try to soft shoe around not offending the public. They're saying, no, this is important to us. And that is sort of to me, that shows a risk that we haven't seen, because the athletes haven't really been faced with like real risk. Now you kind of are faced with risk if the public decides, you know what, we're not going to come back. I think they're banking on, I'm interested in your, are they banking on the fact that this is so powerful, people want to watch these games be played, and life's going to go on?
Look, I go back to, conversations I've had with again, friends of mine. The politics of this sport, of your players, is turning me off, and I don't want to watch football anymore. Well, I don't really understand people who say that to me, because first of all, I don't play. And second, I don't know whether they then want me to turn into this supplicant who then begs them, please, please, I need you to watch the game, because that's not going to happen. So I think, to your point, I think you're seeing players now who, again, 4 years ago, we had conversations. There were people out there in this space, frankly, this sports techie space, saying that the protests are hurting ratings and protests are hurting the ability to keep sponsors. Well, again, going back a few years ago, if in the National Football League, where we are blessed to have double-digit revenues in the billions of dollars, if we are staying awake at night worrying about losing a pizza sponsor, then we've got bigger work. So it seemed to me 4 years ago, and it's the truth now. Our players play a great game, and they do it because they love it. It is a fantastic game. If people want to watch it, watch it. If people don't want to watch it, don't watch it. But to your point, I think that we're past this time where players think that, at least our players, think that they have to comport themselves to some two-dimensional frame.
Yep.
And living with that as the only thing that defines them.
Yep.
And I think that's a great thing.
Yep. We've got about 5 minutes left. I want to throw one last question at you. I know we could do this. We could do this all day.
All day.
When you and I spoke, when we were first talking about this back in 2016, and then we talked again, obviously, over the years, but one of the real long interviews that we did on this, you were skeptical at some level about the limits or the possibilities of what the players could actually accomplish in terms of, okay, is this, I remember, I think the way you put it was, is protest a labor issue, right? Do we get involved in this? And now 4 years later, there's no getting around that this is all part of one big goulash, right? It's one big mismatch now. How is your feelings? What has been your evolution on this in terms of, can this be separated now? Does it need to be separated? Do we have and what I mean by separation is, what does this do for labor? Like one of the arguments that you and I had, I remember saying, when the Players Coalition went out and they were talking to the commissioner specifically, one of the issues I had, and I'm having this conversation with baseball players and I'm talking with basketball folks about it too, is you guys still have CBAs that you need to negotiate. You still have other businesses that you need to negotiate with these, with these leagues. So what does this do to complicate your job? What does it do in terms of the evolution of sort of how you feel about where this fits in the sports business space?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's difficult because our North Star, as long as I'm here, is always going to be that we're a labor union. And the reason why that has to be the North Star, in my opinion, is once you decide to form yourself as a union, that means that when it comes to major issues or almost every issue, you are caring about the wages, hours, and working conditions of your membership. And if there are 24 hours in the day and 23 and a half of them have to be dedicated to wages, hours, and working conditions, they're going to be dedicated to those things. And if there's time left for anything else, then that's fine. If a labor union and adhering to those things are going to be your North Star, it necessarily means that minority is heard, majority rules. And while I might care about this issue, or I might care about that issue, or some people might care about this issue, we have, like I said, 2,000 players and 4,000 opinions. What I do care about is I do care and know that the strength of a labor union is its ability to effectuate principles based on solidarity. And I can't live in a world where we would sacrifice that solidarity for almost anything. So the goal then becomes, how do you take all of these other issues that are extremely important, are meaningful to your members, but then it has to become the groundswell of the membership to decide that this is important enough that, okay, out of the 23 and a half hours, we're going to spend 5 hours on this.
Yep.
And that's fine. And, you know, for us, you know, the first sea change in that for me was back in 2009 when I came into this job. It only seems like 35 years. But, you know, talking to our players about health and safety and concussions, we normally didn't have those conversations. Mm-hmm. We played football. We were gladiators. Getting hurt is part of the game. Getting your bell rung is part of the game. You measured the greatness of an athlete, and you heard the commentators talking about it. Well, clearly he's hurt, but he's not going to come out of this game.
He plays hurt. Toughness.
Right. And so, you know, having that conversation where, again, there was a groundswell because of education with our membership, where, wait a minute, we can actually engage in wages, hours, working conditions, but that doesn't have to be divorced from an ultimate goal of protecting the health of our membership.
That's right.
So I think what you've seen, you know, not only in football, but you mentioned hockey, you've seen people who've come to realize as a group of members that we are not going to be divorced from critical issues in our community that define us as humans. And anybody who asks us to divorce ourselves from our communities or somehow separate ourselves from who we are, they're not real fans.
No. Well, your whole sport, your whole sport has been doing that for 4 years. I mean, there's been no sport that has been more unambiguous about how it felt about protest than the National Football League. And now suddenly you're watching week 1 and the words "end racism" are in the back of the end zone.
If you would have told me, well, put it this way, I would have lost a large sum of money if you would have made that bet with me 4 years ago when we were talking. And look, it's a blessing to see. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I had sort of squared it up in my head about what it all means. I think probably at some point that'd be a great conversation for you and I to have about the significance and meaningfulness of all of this. Because if it's not significant, if it's not meaningful, it's just mindless entertainment.
Yeah. How much meaning can it have right now when Colin's still not being entertained to play? I mean, that's the thing about your sport that is different from everybody else's sport, because that is the thing that looms over the NFL more than any other thing.
Well, I think it's meaningful. The question becomes, what does it mean? Right? I mean, you can put in racism at the end of the end zone. Does that mean we've arrived at not punishing somebody for taking a stand? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
So to me, it's you may not end up with the meaning that you like, but you know, thankfully there's people like you who analyze this sport, you know, at a level, you know, that's deeper than it just being entertainment. Because if that's all we're doing, I don't think we're serving the real values of our community. And worse yet, you know, to me, the greatest meaning that's come out of the way in which athletes have dealt with us, you know, you see a fantastic tennis player, right? Who's young,
22,
young, and has the level of wisdom, you know, to respond to a reporter by saying, well, I don't think it's so much about what I'm saying. I think the real question is, what do you think from it?
Yeah, what did you get out of it?
What's the significance and meaning? And so my hope is that what we've done in football matters to our community. For, you know, a son who's playing college sports, I hope that what we're doing means something to a generation that's coming after us.
Yeah. I got to admit, D, I was completely wrong earlier this year about college, about where colleges were going on this, because I felt like they have fought for 75 years to protect amateurism, and that the juxtaposition between having remote learning on college campuses, having no one in the dorms, was going to force colleges to not have athletes playing, because how can you have college shut down but you still have the athletes playing? How much, I mean, what are you taking from what's happening with colleges right now? What is it saying? Is it simply just plain brazenness where, okay, what are you going to do about it? And people want to play? Or, and what are the implications for the NFLPA, considering that these are your future members?
Yeah, look, I boil it down, and I know we're just about out of time. You see a system that has an inability to be influenced by a union of players. And the result is brazenness.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that. So I think that at the end of the day, when you don't, I always talk to our guys about being a union as being a team, because that's all it is.
Yep.
You have a NCAA who preaches competition, family, brotherhood, sisterhood, having each other's back. And yet the only place where they don't want that team to exist is off the field. So, you know, having a son that's a D1 athlete, I don't believe in the word student athlete because it's a legal fiction. We live in a world where there is a group of athletes who, in some cases, generate a tremendous amount of revenue for the schools. And what I think you are seeing now are universities making a decision that they can't do without that revenue, or they can't do without the political pressure of not playing. And frankly, very few of them have employed the protocols that should be employed to keep their athletes safe. And that's not everybody.
Yep.
But I guess what to me has been the greatest failure, and I've talked to a number of college ADs, at a time when the NCAA could have stepped into its moment to provide uniform national leadership on COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
You saw them take a back seat and leave it to the conferences and the schools.
Yep.
And I think the only thing that will be interesting to see what comes out of that is I think a lot of conferences are now asking themselves, why do we need the NCAA anyway?
Yeah, I really do think, and I've been thinking about this for several months now, that it always comes from the place you don't expect.
Yeah.
That the years from now, we're going to be looking, and not even maybe months from now, we're going to be looking at the pandemic as one of the fulcrums for shifting how this business looks. You're seeing it in baseball too.
100%. And look at, again, going back to, I think OSHA fined 2 meatpacking companies a few $1,000s for subjecting their workers, and some of whom who died, to working conditions that weren't safe. That's leading a whole group, and I'm going to tell you, it impacted us. We know that we can't rely on somebody else to take care of us.
Yep.
So I think you've seen workers across the country take it upon themselves that we have to energize, we have to mobilize, we have to become a collective group, and we have to fight for ourselves. And frankly, when you start to see college athletes push back, like some of the players, I think in California,
in the Pac-12, sure, Stanford. Mm-hmm.
Well, when you see players taking health and safety into their own hands, to me, that's nobody wanted to go through something as horrible as this. But going back to something we mentioned earlier, what does football mean for those players who decided that they were going to take their health and safety destiny into their own hands? Football means something completely different to them than the group that was there before them. And I think that's inspiring.
Yeah, and that's the concerning part of it, is the folks that when you start bringing in the race and the economics of it, it's the family and the athletes who have the cushion and the opportunity to have it not matter. as opposed to the people who really need it to matter.
And look, and we should end on this, but you look at the juxtaposition between the way the Northwestern players were treated when they tried to unionize and the way I think the Missouri players were treated when they felt that their campus wasn't responding appropriately to racism. And on one hand, you had a group that was applauded, and on the other hand, you had a group where people felt that they were somehow disrupting the game.
Yep.
They were both doing the same thing. And they were trying to take their own destiny in their own hands. And I think, Howard, anytime you and I chat, it's fantastic. We could go on forever, but thanks to Sports Techie and certainly thanks to you for having me on.
No, I was going to say, you wrapped it up before I had a chance to, but one of these days we will see each other in person and do this again.
Be safe, brother.
Thank you. You too.